Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Shiz and Giggles. I'm your host for this week. My name is Sam. We have an exciting episode for you today. We're going to be talking about changes, and I'm going to bring in my co host for this week. First, we have the fabulous and amazing Jasmine. Hi, Jasmine. How are you?
Hi, Sam. I'm doing fabulous. How are you?
I'm doing great. That's amazing. We have another co host with us this week, and that is the wonderful Christine. Hey, Christine,
Hello.
how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. And then we have one more co host joining us today, and that is the amazing, the inspirational Andrea. How are you, Andrea?
Hi, Sam. How are you doing?
Doing pretty well. I'm really excited for this week's episode. We're going to be talking about some changes. And of course, everyone around the world has experienced changes during the past few months, but we also experience changes every day of our lives. So I'm going to pose you with the first question, but before I do that, I want to give everyone the dictionary definition of what changes actually means. So, changes, according to dictionary.com, means to make the form, nature, content, future course, etc., of something different from what it is or from what it would be if left alone. So, with that definition in mind, I am going to pose you all and our audience with our very first question for today. What's the first word that comes to your mind when you think of changes? Jasmine, I'll start with you.
Whenever I hear the word changes, I get like my hands get sweaty, I get nervous, and I get anxious. I'm like, I do not. I am proud to say. When I won't say proud, but I can say this. I'm not a big fan of change. I think not a lot of people are, so it's very common. So when I think of change, I think of like something hard to do. So I'm trying to get out of that mindset because not all change is bad change. Some change is good because you change and evolve into a better person or whatever you're doing. As you continue doing something, you change and it becomes better. But that's the first thing I think of.
What a great definition and a great perspective. Christine, what about you? What's the first word that comes to mind when you think of changes?
Honestly, when I think of change, I always think, or at least the first word that comes to mind is probably growth, because no matter what, if something changes, it's something different than it was before. So people can think of it as a positive change, so you can think of it as moving forward, or they could think of it as a negative change, which is like moving backward. Now, I personally am also not a fan of changes, but I'm really working on it, really trying to think of the fact that, change is something constant, and it's just something like a mindful practice to always think, okay, change isn't bad. You can always think of it as something positive.
That's awesome. I love that forward and backward perspective. What an interesting way to kind of talk about it. Andrea, I'm interested. What's the first word that you think of when you think of changes?
I think of opportunity, right? Like that's what everybody tells you to think of when you think of something's going to change. You think of something bad, and I used to, sometimes life is going good, and then you just don't want it to change. And then there's, or business is going good. Oh, don't even get me started on 2020. That dumpster fire that we are going through right now. At the beginning of the year, we were like sold out at our business, and then change happened, and then we weren't sold out. So it was kind of negative, is what it was. And then very recently, I'm coming to a place where change is really about embracing an opportunity. So that's what I'm thinking about now. That's kind of when people say, okay, things have changed. Then I now think, okay, this is an opportunity for me to embrace something new. But who likes change, right? Like who wants that?
That's awesome. I love that idea of opportunity. I really enjoy everything that you guys said and how you kind of think of change. I personally, the first word that comes to mind for me is adventure. I think whatever adventure you go on in life, it's going to have some bumps. And part of change and growth is going to have some bumps, and you're just going to have to find ways to adapt and push through that. And it's just like what you said, Christine, it's really that growth element. And it's really awesome to sort of see how we perceive it. You guys mentioned I think all of you guys mentioned about how sometimes it can be scary and fearful. So, why do you think we fear change, Jasmine?
Let me unmute myself. I think we fear change because it's something that is breaking up a norm for us. So I think a lot of people like, and I'll say a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people do like when things are consistent. So when you're putting a block in someone's consistency or what they're used to or what they're good at, it causes some uncertainty. So I think that's why people fear change because it's a block in what they're known to do or what they're good at.
I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think also one point to make is that the fear of change is called metathesiophobia, and it's a Greek word, and it derives from meta, which means change, and phobia or phobos, which means fear. And a quick little disclaimer, I'm not an expert in psychology. This is just from an article I read.
What? I thought you were.
But I found it super interesting, and people living with this fear of change might feel like they have no control, sort of similar to your point, Jasmine. And it can be caused by many other things. So to add on to that sort of fear of control, Andrea, what do you think of causes fear?
Oh man, I don't know about for everybody, but it's always people like the unknown. They don't like the unknown, although we enjoy surprises, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes we enjoy, like, you don't want to know necessarily what you're getting for your birthday if you're getting a gift and if you're into that type of thing, but you also don't want to not know, or you always want to know if something impacts you negatively. We kind of want to know ahead of time what's going on. So I think the fear of change happens because part of it is the unknown, and then humans, we're pattern people, right? So if the last time something changed it was negative for us, then the assumption or the pattern that we make in our brain is that change is bad for us. So I think that's a big psychological factor that people have in regarding change, any type of change.
That's a great point, Andrea. Christine, what would you like to add, sort of your perspective about why we fear change?
Honestly, I was also going to touch on the topic of like, it's like human nature to not want unfamiliarities and like uncertainties in our lives. And a lot of times, like a lot of people find that it's really anxieties that keep them from seeing ahead of them, seeing what's really clear and in front of them. And I remember this quote that I read from an article recently, and it said, "The mind is like water, so when the mind is turbulent, it's difficult to see in front of you. But when it's calm, everything becomes clear." So I think a lot of times with change, it's like,
that's good.
Yeah, I think a lot of times with change, it's like people they allow themselves to be filled with so much anxiety and just to be scared of the future. So it takes a lot of courage and practice and like mindful thinking just to be in the positive mindset that change doesn't always have to be negative. It doesn't always have to be muddled and uncertain and scary.
That is so powerful, Christine. The quote and what you said, just so powerful and impactful, and I think something a lot of people can relate to. And I know for myself, the reason I fear change is very similar to that quote, where everything in my mind just starts to feel very like chaotic. And even though I welcome change and I see it as adventure, I still have hesitation because it's like what Andrea said earlier, that negativity where we want to prepare ourselves just in case. And I do agree with you all about how it is because of that routine that we as humans like to have, even if it's something as simple as waking up at a certain time. I love everything you guys said about that and how it relates. Moving on to sort of from fear of change, I want to talk to you guys about how we adapt to change. Because I think in everything, we should also have a solution, especially when a change comes about in our life. We want to have a solution and be prepared. So I read an article from Psychology Today, and it said that the number one way to cope with change is to first acknowledge the change. And I do agree that it is the first step, and I find it in myself that this is the first step I take without realizing necessarily that it is that first thing I did, because I want to jump into an actual practical solution. So I'm curious, Christine, I'm going to jump back to you. How do you adapt to change?
Honestly, I normally just have to take it one step at a time. I do acknowledge change first. I remember when I was younger, I often would just shut down and it wasn't productive at all. And my mom had to sit me down one time because it was getting pretty bad and I was like being super unproductive. And she was like, Christine, you have to understand that the only constant in life is change. And honestly, that stuck with me as I like moved on to my adult years, and I had to come to the realization that everything's always going to change. And I just have to be in a mindful setting that change is something that will always happen. It's inevitable. And you just have to adapt. And not necessarily like in a negative way. You don't have to be like, oh, this is always going to be like, it's always just going to be horrible. And I'm just never going to get used to change and I'm always going to hate it. You can take things one step at a time. Take things one step at a time and just try and think positively about what changes are to come that could bring good things into your life, you know?
That positivity perspective is great, Christine. And I do agree with your mom in saying that change is the only constant thing that we do have. Jasmine, I'm going to jump to you now. I want to know, how do you adapt to change, especially working in an industry that has a lot of evolving changes?
Mm-hmm. That's a key thing, Sam. Definitely working. Well, one, the time that we're in, we all have had to adapt to some kind of change, whether it was us adapting to it quickly or not. Definitely with also being in events, a lot of things can change within a couple of hours. You start off with a plan that's set in stone, set in stone, contract signed on, okay, this is what we're going to do, X, Y, and Z. And then a couple weeks in, you're like, oh, let's change this. And it can completely alter what you're doing. But of course, the client, if it's doable, and you're like, yeah, okay, we can do that. But in your mind, it's like, oh my God, I got to go back to the drawing board. I got to redo everything that I just did. So I feel like being in this industry has definitely helped me with adapting to change. Not saying I'm great at it, because I'm not, but I'm definitely better than where I was. But I have to agree with Christine and what she said of adding it little by little. So if there is a major change that's going to happen in your life, putting it into your routine little by little until it's fully in your routine, because you do want to bumper it with some things that are constant. So you don't want your full focus to be on that change, which can be a negative to you. You want to also combine it with some positives, so to create a neutral balance. So that's definitely how I have to adapt to change with new things.
That neutral balance is great. I agree. I definitely have to also neutralize my own balances, or otherwise I'm just like way too much on the other side. Andrea, I'm going to bring you in now. I am curious, how do you adapt to change?
I'm so glad you brought me in. Let me tell you, a long time ago, somebody told me you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. That is the best advice I've ever gotten. And because I do think change, you adapt better to change the more you practice adapting to change. And we do it all the time. We were doing it in a little way just with our events this week. So we had a few events this week that some of them went off without a hitch. Some of them, they had a few glitches. We'll nicely call them glitches. And when those glitches happen, it's like a glitch in the matrix. When those things happen, we have a process internally here that we use to assess it. Actually, I think if you guys bear with me, I think you can probably see that list a little bit. It's WTFJH, right? So WTFJH list. And what that list is after we have glitches in the road, we don't try to fix it as it happens. We look at it afterwards and go, what the just happened? That's the WTFJH. What the just happened? And so we go, okay, the problem is usually part of the pattern. The problem is the pattern. So you can't, if you were to sew, so for example, if you sew, you're not going to get a dress template for a template for a dress or to sew a dress. You're not going to get a pillowcase if you get a template for a dress, right? No matter what you sew, it's still going to be a dress. So we try to focus on what was the thing is this a cause or an effect, right? So we nail down what's the thing? What's the thing? Is this a cause or it's an effect? What happened? Is this in a cause or an effect? And we do our best to try to get to, let's fix the pattern and not the thing, that the effect of it. So let's fix the cause. Let's get to the cause and beyond the effect. So we do that for every single project. So for this one, in looking at the list, one of the things that we need to figure out is, do we have all of our processes written down that are repeatable for other people? And it's like, where are our processes not written down that maybe we're winging it in our checklist? So we need to write certain things down as part of our checklist that are, they're gaping holes at this moment. And so we need to fix that. So that's a change that we're going to have to do in the way that we deliver a service to our customers, our clients. And when we do have that change, it's actually going to be better for them, and not just them. It's for everyone else after them. So a change can be more than just the thing that benefits you at the time, but it can also be beneficial down the road for other situations. But the only way that we've gotten good at this is by practicing change. We get used to it and we say, I think sometimes change can be, if you look at change as negative, it can be kind of an arrogant form of looking at it, because that's assuming that everything is right? That would be assuming that your entire way of thinking was right. So it's an arrogant form of thinking, perhaps, or you're not thinking, hey, perhaps there's a better way. And by having change, I now have to see it a different way, which means there could be a better way.
That's such an amazing perspective, and especially with that sort of pattern. And I do agree, everything takes practice, and all of the changes we come across in our life and that practice we have is going to lead us to a growth mindset, and we can grow and learn from it as we go on. I've had so many moments in my life where I just overwhelm myself because of change, but I have to ground myself and say, you know what? This is happening. I need to find a learning opportunity from this and try and move forward from there. So I think our main key takeaway during this entire conversation is sort of knowing how to adapt to our own changes and understanding ourselves, and also learning from others, because it helps to know what others are saying and what others are thinking. And I want to leave you all with some final thoughts. First, I want to ask our guests, do you guys have any final thoughts, key takeaways, something that really was impactful to you?
I have something to say.
Go ahead, Jasmine.
I would like to pose a question in the comments to all of our friends that are watching. What are your thoughts on change? What are some things that you do to help you with change? Because I know I definitely would like to know. So we so approve of change. So make sure to drop that in the chat. Of like, how do you I don't want to say cope with change, but how do you become better at dealing with change?
That's an
That's all I gotta
awesome
say.
that's an awesome question to pose for our audience. And I want to leave you all with some final thoughts as
Wait,
we
I got one thing. I was gonna go
oh,
after Jasmine. I
tell
was gonna go
me.
after
I want to
Jasmine.
know.
Okay, so again, I'm gonna harp on it every single time. So cool thing about change, it can be unexpected, but can also be really, really, really great. So at the beginning of this conversation, we talked about how we were sold out for the rest of the year when in January of this year, All About Presentation was like sold out. We literally couldn't have taken another event on, and then they all got canceled, like wiped out. And then we had to rethink, how do we do this? And I'm happy to say that the year is shaping up incredibly different, and yet the outcome is becoming more of the same, of a sold out type of business. So I think in March and April and May, I never could have imagined at all still being able to say, you know what, I think we're sold out. And so for the rest of the year, because everything had gotten wiped away. So sometimes change isn't, it may not be what you expected, but it might be the best thing for you. And I think that it's always important to remember, in the moment, it's like, this is the worst ever. And I am totally for that, that feeling. But one of the things I'll just say, and my kind of final comment, is just have grace and compassion for yourself as well in the change process, because change isn't overnight. Well, sometimes it is overnight. Boom, hits you like a ton of bricks. But it's having the grace and compassion for yourself that's super important, as well as empathy for yourself in making the change, and also celebrating yourself as you're making changes. My mother was a teacher for 45 years. If she had a student that was failing out and not doing well, when that student, they may have gotten a D, but the moment they got a C, she celebrated. If they got a C plus, she celebrated. When they were on their way to making B's, she celebrated. She didn't just celebrate when they got an A. She celebrated on their way to an A. So just as a reminder, as you're undergoing changes and as you're doing things, celebrate yourself along the way. Celebrate it along the way.
Period.
Yes. Periodade, as Jasmine would
Okay,
say.
I wasn't gonna go there, but since you did, periodade. It's not a real word, everyone. It's not a real word. I know
not a
this.
real word.
I know this.
Yeah, that's excellent, Andrea. It really, really is so impactful and such a great thing to think about as we all head into the weekend. And one thing I want to say is this quote by John Maxwell. And he says, change is inevitable, but growth is optional. And when change happens, give yourself grace. Just like Andrea said, give yourself grace and empathy and compassion. And this is how you'll grow. And whatever comes your way, small, big, medium, whatever it is, you're going to be able to tackle it and use this as an opportunity to grow. And just remember, you're never alone when you're going through changes. Everyone else is right there with you. I want to say thank you to my wonderful co-hosts, Jasmine, Andrea, Christine, for joining me today. You guys are all wonderful. And I want to thank the audience for watching along and listening to this conversation. I hope you all got something out of this conversation. And just a quick reminder, we stream every Friday at 4 p.m. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next week. Enjoy your weekend.